397115.
Hello, operator. This is a new episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the studio every week, challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Samantha Carter
and Sarah Jones.
Please hold. I'll connect you to your party.
Before we get to the subject, we're going to start off by harassing you to do the subscribe, rate, and review things. Like, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter. And most importantly, share us with your friends. Word of mouth is absolutely one of the best ways to help get our show out there in the world, and we appreciate the heck out of you for not only listening yourselves, but for recommending us. We recently announced the winners of our most recent contest on one of our traditionally awkward Facebook Live videos. Sarah, me, got the pleasure of being a one-man show this time, and Sam says I did okay. So I guess I don't know because I did not watch it after it happened. So those lucky tweeters won some free Bigfoot for Breakfast merchandise, a t-shirt or an awesome glitter mug, and both of them actually chose t-shirts, so that worked out pretty well. They're made by With Love Custom Creations out of Sheraton, Iowa. Check out their Facebook page and hit the link to their online store. Also, our voicemail system is in full swing, and we love hearing what our listeners have to say.
Hello, Wyatt Sanch here, short-time listener, long-time Pringle lover. I just wanted to go ahead and give your kudos to the show. I really enjoy listening to it on a weekly basis. I love the topics that you all bring out, and just wanted to say thank you for I discovered you. I'm really excited. Yeah, I do want to mention one thing, though, that I have about the show. I do know that you talk about the beyond, the frightening, and there, and the ghouls and everything, but I was just wondering if you could maybe talk about the macabre. I mean, I always hear you reference it, but I've never heard anything about Cobb family. The family I am referring to is based out of Ontario, Canada. They were really, really in the corner of the Cobb. If you could really get into that story, I could give you features if you want to send them by direct link. My handle name on Instagram is Sorcerer1. If you could just go ahead and send me a direct message, I can definitely get you intel on the corner of the Cobb family. I'm not going to tell you all the stories because they're a little bit surprising, but I think it's something we can go in depth to. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful evening. I shall talk to you later. Bye.
Today we're going to talk about something that's pretty creepy and amazingly interesting. If you haven't heard of this, I'm really excited to be the one that gets to share it with you. We're definitely tackling both the mysterious and the macabre. Yes, we are indeed going to address the Cobb family.
Indeed.
BT dubs, you don't need to tell us about Cornbro. We're from Iowa.
It is literally everywhere.
Anyway.
And I have yet to see murderous children. That is but a myth. But that did not take place in Iowa.
Was that Illinois?
Gatlin, Kansas. I thought it was Gatlin, Illinois, but I looked it up the other night and it was actually in Kansas.
Anyway.
Off the subject.
In this episode, we discuss a race among giants to accomplish things far beyond their time. Giants who had begun this race on the same side, but whose ideals and methodology had created opposition between them. I absolutely love the content of this episode, if I do say so myself.
I'll agree with you.
As it encompasses a mixture of science and spirituality, which you will come to find are not mutually exclusive. On top of that, we're going to throw in a little bit of history, some drama, and a little bit of fangirling as we discuss the competition between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla and their respective journeys to reach beyond the veil through the invention of a telephone to the dead.
In the name of science!
In the name of science!
I bet most people didn't know that they did this.
I bet not either.
Anyway.
But first, we also want to take a few minutes to let you in on some recommendations that we have for some other shows. We know a few that may pique your interest. The Question Everything guys, Semper Fi Rob, Sean, and the Mick host a show where they pick a different topic every week that usually seems to coincide with issues that we seem to be facing at the time as American people, and they discuss it. They usually do a Facebook Live every Saturday, and then they'll post the edited version to the podcast platforms a few days later. They also take call-ins from guests who have anything to say regarding the topic that week. So if you can relate in some way or have an opinion, get on their Facebook Live and give them a call and chat them up for a while.
MWP is another show that you guys should check out. Chach and Josh are funny and their conversations flow really well. They talk a lot about movies, wrestling, politics, whatever else comes up through the episode with a lot of jokes and a lot of great personality. So check them out. You won't regret it.
The Kensington Corner with Tom and Jeff is another great show. They tackle the problems of the world one thing at a time, but they focus a lot on health and overall well-being, both mentally and physically, from a man's standpoint. And we found their show to be really interesting because they aren't afraid to really get into the everyday struggles that guys face, especially with mental health and stress. It's a really honest show, and one of them is a veteran, so they promote various causes associated with the mental health of veterans as well, which we think is incredible because it's a very important topic and our nation's veterans don't get the love and support that they deserve. Any conversation that can be had about how to improve that is fantastic. Let's set the stage. As we aren't going to assume everyone listening is familiar with the history surrounding this epic Clash of the Titans tale. Also, although this episode is based primarily on these two particular men, we in no way mean to exclude or devalue the contributions made by the many other men working alongside them in any capacity. That being said, here we go.
I disagree. It was all Tesla. Thomas Edison was and continues to be a household name in America. Ohio-born from humble beginnings, he became a world-renowned inventor who helped change the world. But before that, Thomas Edison worked as a telegraph operator. This was a skill that he was taught by a man whose child Edison had saved from being run over by a wayward train when he worked on the railroad at age 15. He was 22 years old when he moved to New York and developed his first invention, the universal stock printer. The rights for this invention were purchased by the Golden Stock Telegraph Company for the grand sum of $40,000, which allowed him to begin inventing full-time. In 1870, Edison set up a small laboratory and manufacturing facility in New Jersey. In 1877, the phonograph was born, which used tin-coated cylinders and needles to record the sound and play it back. However, I think we all can agree that the most notable of Edison's inventions would be the incandescent light bulb. Edison purchased the patent from Henry Woodward and Matthew Evans, following their unsuccessful attempt to perfect the design using a vacuum. And then after working to improve upon their design, he created an improved version for which he was granted his own patents, according to biography.com. So technically, the light bulb wasn't his brainchild. He improved on it and most importantly, figured out how to sell it. In 1896, he was the first to project a motion picture, the inspiration for which he drew from the invention of the kinetoscope by an associate named Dickson.
According to most history books, because we'll get into that later. Let's jump back to 1884, the year that 28-year-old Nikola Tesla arrived in America. Serbian-born Tesla made his way with little but the clothes on his back, but came to Edison with a recommendation letter for employment, which he was granted. This epic team-up lasted only several months as a conflict of personalities put them at odds with one another. According to biography.com, in 1885 he received funding from investors and was tasked with the development of an improved arc lighting system. Unfortunately, after the successful completion of this venture, he was forced out and had to resort to seeking work as a manual laborer for his survival. It would be 2 years before he once again received investor funding for the new Tesla Electric Company. Nikola Tesla is known for being a pioneer and is responsible for the discovery and development of technologies used still today, including radar, X-ray, radio, and most notably, he is known for his innovations and improvements to the alternating current electrical system.
The most notable of the controversies between these has come to be known as the War of Currents, AC versus DC, or alternating current electricity versus direct current electricity. Thomas Edison was responsible for the development of direct current, which runs continuously in a single direction. Think a battery or fuel cell. This particular type of current is difficult to convert, either to higher or lower currency, according to energy.gov. At the time, however, this was the standard in the United States. On the other hand, Tesla's answer to this problem was an alternating current system, which is capable of reversing direction a certain number of times per second and is capable of conversion to varying voltages with this use of a transformer. Understandably, it was Edison's best interest to maintain the standard of DC electricity as he was earning a fair amount of royalties from his patents. See, this is where it all started with the corporate monopolies. And we're not going to change anything or...
Initially, I was trying to present each person without bias.
Oh, we're not without bias on this. We're going to just go ahead with our bias. Like the renewable energy fight. There's a reason why that seems like it's being kept down.
Yeah,
because
how
how much money will honestly be lost by a few people and jobs. I get that. But man, it would make such a difference in the world. Anyway, therefore, as the story goes, Edison took to spreading misinformation regarding AC, alleging that it was more dangerous. He went to great lengths to convince the general public of this through using alternating current to execute stray dogs which were collected by boys that Edison paid per animal, calves and a horse by electrocution. In 1903, a film was made by Edison of an elephant named Topsy being electrocuted by means of alternating current as a public safety demonstration to discourage the support of his competition.
Poor Topsy. George Westinghouse, another master of industry in America at the time, was known for his patents of railroad air brakes, the rotary steam engine, a water meter, railroad signaling systems, as well as developing pipelines for natural gas. Westinghouse purchased the patent for the AC motor developed by Tesla and then subsequently hired him to improve and modify the design for use in his own power system, according to a Britannica article on Westinghouse.
At the peak of the AC-DC war, the World's Columbian Exposition, also known as the Chicago World's Fair, took place in 1893. Bids to electrify this event were placed by Edison's General Electric at a staggering $554,000, as well as Westinghouse, whose bid was a mere $399,000, using Tesla's AC technology. The lowest bid was accepted, of course, and the war waged on, and to an extent, it continues today.
The best-known tech created by its namesake would be the Tesla coil, which sets the roots for wireless technologies that are still in use for radio technology to this day, and was used by Tesla himself to study radio, wireless power, and electromagnetism in the Earth and its atmosphere. The Tesla coil is an inductor which had been used in early radio transmission antennas, working with a capacitor to resonate current and voltage from a power source across a circuit. At this point, he is a man obsessed, dedicated to the idea of bringing energy to the masses on a global level, as well as wireless communication through the use of large electrical towers. Oh yeah, and he wanted to provide this for free. This project was set in motion in 1901. However, it did not come to fruition as another inventor, an Italian named Guillermo Marconi, funded by General Electric and Andrew Carnegie, began making astounding advances of his own in the development of radio technology, causing Tesla's investors to question the soundness of their investment and pull their funding.
Poor Tesla. He's dealing with a lot of stuff.
And Edison's got his fingers in all of it.
Yep.
By 1915, the site of Tesla's tower was in foreclosure, and he himself filed for bankruptcy 2 years later, dismantling the tower and selling off materials to pay debt. Sad story. After this, the man became more and more eccentric, suffered a mental breakdown, and his ideas and inventions became seemingly more bizarre. However, aside from the death laser, I feel like he was always pretty eccentric. Enter the topic of the day.
Finally, I've been waiting. Here is where we get to the best part of the story. For us, anyway. In the 1920s, it had become a mainstream trend to hold seances and attempt to commune with loved ones who were lost. I know, there are those who would scoff at the concept. However, thou shalt not exclude men of science from the realm of the paranormal entirely. These two men, arguably some of the greatest scientific minds of their time, or even of our time, did not dismiss the possibilities that may exist beyond our earthly existence or understanding. Both men dedicated themselves to projects in the pursuit of greater knowledge regarding life after death, the human soul, and the possibility of opening the door between our plane of existence and theirs. Of course, they were not the only ones.
According to multiple sources, it was 1920 when Edison disclosed to a magazine that he had been working for quite some time on the development of his spirit phone. However, this project was considered somewhat controversial, or that it may have been a hoax, due to the fact that there were no known prototypes, blueprints, or any other evidence found to indicate that he had actually attempted to tackle such a project, until 2015. A French journalist happened upon a rare version of Edison's diary in a thrift store, from which the chapter regarding this subject matter had not been excluded, as it was in most versions available. The rewritten chapter of the Edison diary was published by the French broadcast director at Radio France, and was published by this journalist who had previously written books discussing Walter Benjamin as well as sound studies. The title of the Forgotten Thomas Edison book is the realms beyond. Aside from the chapter of the diary which elaborated on his theories and methodology, no other evidence that this machine was ever actually constructed has been found that I could see from all my research.
So it's known at this point that the concept of this device did exist. He was working on it as he described it and the science behind it in the redacted diary entry that we just discussed. But why was it hidden? Regardless, he had not only made public his intention to create a spirit phone or ghost machine, but he also publicly discussed the scientific theory behind it, which has since yielded to the modern theoretical physics of quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance, and of course, Einstein's special theory of relativity. Edison believed that although he was not certain that human consciousness existed on another plane after death of the body, if Einstein's theory of special relativity were correct, then nothing or no one truly faded from existence. Essentially, he theorized the universe of eternal matter, which is neither created nor destroyed in a shared reality, in which all life participates. Therefore, one could surmise that a device capable of communicating with that collective unconsciousness may be able to carry signals back and forth from both sides.
To be clear, it was never the goal of Thomas Edison to achieve these end goals through occult or magical means, but through scientific methods. In fact, you were likely to hear the man refer to spiritualists as fakes, discrediting their claims in regard to foretelling the future or other mystical arts, especially attempting to use Ouija boards as a means of communication with the spirit world. To think that a disembodied spirit could or would manifest using a piece of wood was considered to be ridiculous. In his diary, he wrote,
"The thing which first struck me was the absurdity of expecting spirits to waste their time operating such cumbersome, unscientific media as tables, chairs, and the Ouija board with the letters."
There were plenty of others in the scientific community who did not agree with his negative sentiments on the subject. For example, according to an article by Addison Nugent for OZY.com, after the invention of the telephone in 1876, a number of mediums called phone voyants came forward, claiming the ability to hear the voices of the dead crackling through the telephone wires. In fact, the telephone inventor Alexander Graham Bell himself was a believer in these skills, as he seemed to be, much like everyone else of the era, quite fascinated with the concept of spiritualism and was even known to have attended a seance or two.
So let's delve a little deeper into his thought process on the science of life and death and energy. For this information, I cite an October 2019 article by Brett Swanser from mysteriousuniverse.org. In this article, it's laid out that Edison believed that the universe itself contained a finite amount of life, which can neither be created nor destroyed. Similar to the conservation of energy or mass laws in thermodynamics, this life is thought to exist in minuscule forms, each as its own separate consciousness or entity, which behave much in the way of an atom to matter as they form the smallest building blocks of life as we understand it. Edison theorized that the consciousness of a person itself is a unique combination of these entities which group together in what is known as the Broca's area of the brain.
To elaborate a little bit on that with a very brief and very crash course version of anatomy of the brain summarized from a ThoughtCo article, the Broca's area is located specifically on the lower portion of the left frontal lobe of the brain and is responsible for the motor functions involved with the production of speech and the comprehension of language. A person who has damage to this specific area would have the ability to understand words but may have difficulty forming individual words into groups for speech. Fun fact, this particular ailment is known as Broca's aphasia. Broca's area works in conjunction with Wernicke's area in the angular gyrus of the brain in speech and language comprehension. Wernicke's area is located on the temporal lobe and is responsible for the processing of both written and spoken language. The angular gyrus receives touch sensory information from the parietal lobe, visual information from the occipital lobe, and auditory information from the temporal lobe, and utilizes these different forms of sensory information for the purpose of language comprehension as well. I'm not sure how much of that you really care to know, but I feel like some understanding of how our physical bodies work may help in the understanding of the possibly non-corporeal aspect of existence as well. Also, I just think brains are cool as hell.
Let's get back to Thomas Edison. So we were discussing the combinations of the finite life molecule type entities swarming in the Broca's area of the brain. And this is what his concept of the human soul was. His theory on death, it seems, relates to the decision of these entities to exist beyond the physical body. So we've kind of summarized these thoughts and tried to break them down a little, but I would like to include an excerpt in his own words.
"I believe that life, like matter, is indestructible. There has always been a certain amount of life in this world, and there will always be the same amount. You cannot create life, you cannot destroy life, you cannot multiply life. I believe that our bodies are composed of myriads and myriads of infinite entities, each in itself a unit of life, which band together to build a man. In our bodies, these entities constantly rebuild our tissues, replace those which are constantly wearing out. They watch after functions of various organs, just as the engineers in a powerhouse see that the machinery is being kept in perfect order. Once conditions in the body become unsatisfactory, either through a fatal sickness, fatal accident, or old age, the entities simply depart from the body and leave little more than an empty structure behind. Being workers, they naturally seek something else to do. They either enter into the body of another man, or even start to work on some other form of life. At any rate, there is a fixed number of these, and the same entities that have served over and over again. They fight out the differences, and then the stronger group takes charge. If the minority is willing to be disciplined and conform, there is a harmony. But minorities sometimes say, "To the hell with this place, let's get out." They refuse to do their appointed work in the man's body. He sickens and dies, and they are all free to seek new experience somewhere else. When we die, these swarms of units, like a swarm of bees, so to speak, betake themselves elsewhere, and go on functioning in some other form or environment. There are many indications that we human beings act as a community or ensemble rather than as units. That is why I believe that each of us comprises millions upon millions of entities, and that our body and our mind represent the vote or voice. Whichever you wish to call it, of our entities, the entities live forever. Death is simply the departure of the entities from the body.
Inversely, it was Edison's belief that if these free particles of space could be assembled back into the unique pattern in which they existed in the person's physical being, then it should be possible that this person's consciousness could then be resurrected. Is your mind blown yet? So, this is where the telephone comes into play. I use the word telephone lightly because in reading his ideals about this instrument he was conceiving, it sounds more like a recording device per se than an actual live line for open dialogue. So, for this concept to become a reality, it seems to me that a few things had to be done. First, we have to find a way to measure whether or not these specific particle types actually exist. Second, we have to find a way to map out the unique patterns and forms taken by these molecules to comprise a person's specific soul in order to recreate said pattern. Lastly, create the tool that can act as a conduit for these molecule patterns to communicate through. Does that sound fair? Edison did in fact put a lot of time and effort into attempting to discover and create these things. He hired a team of scientists which were tasked specifically with this project from what I can surmise, but had very little success in the testing phase to find an effective method for proving the existence of the soul molecules. This, however, did not stop him from continuing his mission to craft the communication device. You make fun of me for using folks all the time, but I swear to God, every 5 minutes I'm saying, from what I can surmise. What I can surmise.
You said it twice.
Particularly.
You said it twice in this article. I like to surmise.
Yeah, I know.
Despite his infatuation with the seemingly paranormal phenomena, Edison took a strong stance against spiritualism, which, as we'd mentioned previously, was a large movement in the time. Spiritual mediums, seances, and Ouija boards were at the height of popularity from a publicity standpoint. As a businessman, it could have proven quite beneficial for him to play on that popularity rather than condemn it, which, to be truthful, is what many people think he was actually doing, just riding the wave, which is what fed the idea that it was a hoax or practical joke on his part, due to the lack of evidence at the time that it had been in the works at all. The vagueness by which he spoke in relation to its functionality, as well as the fact that it never came to fruition on his part that we are aware of, at least.
On the other side of this battle of the spirit phone, so to speak, apparent underdog Nikola Tesla, who initially believed that he had in fact encountered success on this particular project, reportedly managed to create a radio capable of transmitting communications from those who were no longer bound to their earthly bodies around the time of 1901. According to an article by Michelle Debsack for mentalfloss.com, if you recall, this is the same year we mentioned that he was in direct competition with Marconi trying to develop this radio technology, which he did, successfully. However, the patent was awarded instead to Marconi.
I wonder if there was some sort of outside influence on that decision. Anyway.
The device with which he was experimenting took the form of a crystal radio, powered by electromagnetic waves, as he experimented with arguably one of his most important discoveries, terrestrial stationary waves. During these experiments, it was proven to Tesla that the Earth could be used as a conductor in order to resonate at a certain electrical frequency. There have been a lot of attempts to recreate the Tesla Spirit Radio. You can find all kinds of videos on YouTube.
On the YouTube.
So on a website called ancient-code.com, I found a list of materials and instructions for the recreating of this device with modern materials materials using a mason jar, but other than modern recreations and diagrams, I struggled to find much information about the actual spirit radio used by Tesla. But some of the recreations of the radio did have some pretty interesting outputs. So I do want to share some of that with you, as it may be similar to the sounds that Tesla was talking about when he wrote the following excerpts in his diary, which allude to the terrifying sounds which emanated from this device, dated 1918, and it is as follows.
The sounds I'm listening to at first sound like human voices, conversing back and forth in a language. I find it difficult to imagine that I am actually hearing real voices from people, not of this planet. There must be a similar explanation that has so far eluded me.
So let's deviate a little here and discuss a little bit first and foremost to make the point that those quotes were both dated before his reported mental breakdown. Just throwing that out there.
So he wasn't crazy at the time.
As the two of us have been long active in the field of paranormal research, the possibility of actually hearing voices of people who are no longer existing on our plane of existence is exciting and fascinating.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
Of course, the concept of using these types of devices did not end with the presumed failures of historical attempts. Everyone who has watched an episode of Ghost Hunters is familiar, at least in part, with a few of the many devices in existence today, which use different types of technology to ultimately reach the same goal. Most importantly, I'm not entirely sure at the time that he discovered that he was possibly hearing disembodied voices, that it wasn't just something he happened to stumble upon when he was working to develop his method of transmitting radio waves in general. So we don't know whether he intentionally came across this or if he just stumbled upon it accidentally while he was working to create something else.
So he would be working on...
Because he was developing long-distance radio and maybe just happened to start hearing the weird crap coming through.
People just started talking to him.
According to a paper written in 2001 by the Faculty of Electrical Engineering of the University of Belgrade in Yugoslavia, when he began working on radio transmissions around 1890 to 1891, very little was actually known about electromagnetic waves. After Hertz's work in 1888, it became a common belief among scientists at the time that electromagnetic waves behaved like light waves, propagating in straight lines. I want to make a point to note that in 1898, Tesla patented a radio control system for vessels, which has been considered the first practical use of radio, and from May of 1899 through January of 1900, he was in Colorado Springs conducting high-voltage, high-frequency experiments.
We talked a little bit previously about the sudden large-scale interest in the paranormal during this particular time frame, during and after the First World War, which has been referred to as the Great Age of Spiritualism. Why the huge increase of interest, though? Simple. War.
War. Good God, y'all.
Sorry. Why?
Reverb.
Everyone lost loved ones, often suddenly and without closure. However, with the exploration into communication with the dead, albeit on a smaller scale, goes back much further. A BBC article, 7 Facts About Spiritualism in World War I, claims the beginning of the mainstream interest arose with the Fox sisters.
Do you remember when Matt went through that phase where he kept trying to steal my soul through my nose?
Yeah.
Like, I literally could not be off guard for a second or his finger would be up in my nose.
Matt Bush, shout out.
I'll eat your soul. Those are my boogers, bro.
How many times I watched Matt stick his finger up your nose?
Anyway.
All right. The Fox sisters from New York in 1848, with their claims to communicate with the dead through the use of table rapping, meaning knocking or tapping on the table with no apparent physical act of doing so.
Note, I use the word apparent.
Mm-hmm. The sisters, Maggie, 14, and Kate, 11, claim to have made contact with the spirit of a drifter named Mr. Splitfoot. I probably wouldn't have laughed had you not said that. Mr. Splitfoot, who had died, and everybody seemed to eat it up. Such a dick. Stop laughing.
Don't eat the foot. This comes at a very horrible time when I just read an article about a guy that had his foot amputated and then he fed it to his friends in tacos. Anyway.
What?
Tacos.
Why would you
tacos.
decorate it so nicely to seem like it was such a friendly gesture?
He
Because
didn't
tacos
tell
are
them that it was his foot.
Well, obviously. But tacos are such a friendly thing. Don't ruin that. I mean, you offer your friends tacos, right? You put his foot in it.
Don't put your foot in your friend's food.
Like, not even your foot meat. We do not eat our friends or anyone at all.
I would say curiosity killed the cat, but it's the person I'm more concerned about.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself wrote the Fox family's experience with the phenomena, as they had allegedly been experiencing months of torture at the hands of an entity who used what was essentially Morse code to communicate with the sisters through what he described as spiritual telegraph, using 1 knock on the table for yes and 2 knocks for no. I want to share the story of some of their experience as told by Karen Abbott in SmithsonianMag.com. Every night around bedtime, they said they heard a series of raps on the walls and furniture, raps that seemed to manifest with a peculiar, otherworldly intelligence. The neighbor, skeptical, came to see for herself, joining the girls in the small chamber that they shared with their parents. While Maggie and Kate huddled together on their bed, their mother, Margaret, began the demonstration. Now count to 5, she ordered, and the room shook with the sound of 5 heavy thuds. Count 15, she demanded, and the mysterious presence obeyed. Next, she asked it to tell the neighbor's age. 33 distinct raps followed.
That's my age.
If you're an injured spirit, she continued, manifest it by 3 raps. And it did.
So, community leaders became enthralled by the girl's story, as well as the rumor that the spirit may have been that of a peddler who was said to have been murdered 5 years before there in the house. A group of Rochester residents examined the cellar of the Fox's home, discovering strands of hair and bone fragments. The girls were then invited to the home of said community leaders in the hopes that they might make contacts with the spirits there as well. After their convincing demonstration, the girls were stripped and examined in a private room in order to ensure that there was no evidence of a hoax. The examination was done by a committee of skeptics.
At the time, mediums, astrologists, palm readers, and fortune tellers could be arrested under the Witchcraft Act until 1951.
I think that was in Europe, though, technically.
So these acts were presented as entertainment in order to circumvent the law.
Eventually, even Marconi, nearing the end of his life, sketched out plans for a spirit phone in the hope that it would capture every word that had been spoken throughout the entirety of human history. According to an OZY article, he claimed hopes of hearing the last words of Jesus on the cross. Marconi theorized that these disembodied voices continued to ripple through the universe on sound waves, much in the same way that Edison seemed to believe.
The science behind this experiment continues to be utilized in the paranormal field to this day. While the Tesla coil was not invented for this purpose, investigators use them to charge the environment, as one of the most badass functions of a Tesla coil is to essentially shoot lightning bolts of electricity into the atmosphere. The initial purpose of this was to power a fluorescent light bulb across the room without any wires. However, some would speculate that it may also function to attract a spirit, as it thought that an entity needs a form of energy in order to communicate. To achieve this, the theory is that they can manipulate the electromagnetic field around us and use it as a type of battery power source. Tesla coils are used by some investigators to charge the environment, hoping that it might possibly attract an increased paranormal activity in the suspected haunted areas, in the same way that an EM pump functions to flood the room with electromagnetic energy for the same purpose. Does it actually work?
Cannot confirm.
But here we are, back to theorizing the effects of electromagnetic energy in relation to the preternatural. If you recall, we touch on that a bit in regard to the subject of megaliths.
So, when discussing megaliths, we discussed the reasons why a primitive people may have put so much effort into moving such large stones such great distances to build monuments from them in particular locations, and why those particular spots seem to test for higher levels of electromagnetic energy. Aliens aside, there seems to be a lot behind these theories, not only in regard to the EM energy itself, but specifically in the use of specific materials to conduct the energy. According to the materials we found in our research, it was a crystal radio that Tesla was testing when he came upon these eerie transmissions. In an article Tesla wrote in 1901, Talking with the Planets, he says this of receiving said transmissions.
I can never forget the first sensation when it dawned upon me that I had observed something possibly of incalculable consequences to mankind. I felt as though I was present at the birth of a new knowledge or the revelation of a great truth. Even now, at times, I can vividly recall the incident and see my apparatus as though it was actually before me. My first observations positively terrified me, and there was no present in them something mysterious, not to say supernatural, and I was alone in my laboratory at night. But at that time, the idea of the disturbances being intelligibly controlled signals did not yet present itself to me.
So can we discuss the relevance of the materials used to construct the radio device through which these transmissions occurred? I found a few articles which quoted Tesla discussing the use of quartz, which one such quote is as follows.
In a crystal, we have clear evidence of the existence of a formidable life principle, and though we cannot understand life of a crystal, it is nonetheless a living being.
Crystals are a universal element in the world of the metaphysical and paranormal, and according to sources discussing Tesla's work, were a great inspiration to him, and were a common element in a few of his experiments. But why? Most precious and semi-precious stones are well-formed crystals. The electrical conductivity of quartz is primarily ionic. Scientists have worked for years in efforts to discover the electric property of quartz. One such experiment was the process of electrodiffusion, or sweeping, which is intended to improve the performance of the crystal. According to an article found at Wiley Online Library called Electrical Conductivity of Quartz, the swept crystals exhibit a lower steady-state frequency than an unswept crystal with exposure to ionizing radiation. The quartz itself is not conductive, but it has certain electrical properties that make it very useful for certain electronics. In particular, it's piezoelectric, which means it's a non-conductive material which generates electricity when subjected to pressure. The frequency of a crystal is determined primarily by its thickness, so crystals of widely varying frequencies can be achieved by variations in how thick they are cut.
So basically, the size and density and thickness of the crystal determines how the sound comes through it.
Yeah, and they said that natural crystals don't perform as well with these tests as the ones that they do lab created, because they have more effect on those features.
So they can kind of like create hybrid crystals.
Yes, they can make them how they need them for what they need them, kind of, to dumb it down. Science overload!
Let's go back in a lighter direction. And by light, I mean dark and creepy. Let's talk more about contacting the dead. Back to the age of spiritualism. Before the Fox sisters were taking tapping mainstream, the spiritual movement had already begun building from around the 1850s. Its reach had even gone so far as the White House. In the 1960s, when Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln had lost their son Willie, Mary adopted a great number of spiritual practices, including meeting with mediums, holding seances in the White House and other locations, seeking contact with her son in an effort to lessen the overwhelming feeling of loss. Biographer Carl Sandburg wrote, "She rushed into the room of her half-sister and exclaimed, 'He lives, Emily. He comes to me every night and stands at the foot of my bed with the same sweet, adorable smile he always had.' Mrs. Lincoln even got her husband, President Lincoln, involved in her spiritual practices."
According to a 2018 article about Mary Todd by Mitch Horowitz, in April of 1863, the Lincolns hosted a seance in the Red Room of the White House in the company of 2 cabinet secretaries, a trance medium named Charles E. Shuckle, who fainted twice throughout the evening, and a Boston Gazette reporter named Melton. All parties were seated at a table. Lincoln posed questions at Shuckle, and the entity spoke through him. It's entirely possible and speculated that the White House seance was used to demonstrate to the public that even in the midst of the Civil War, their commander-in-chief was relaxed and down-to-earth enough to enjoy the same novel parlor tricks that his fellow Americans were entranced with. Either way, it's apparent and inarguable that Mary Todd Lincoln introduced a very progressive influence to the White House, even throughout the Civil War, and she stood strongly behind her beliefs and her principles until the day she died.
Anyway, I feel like it's important to share how mainstream attempts at communicating with the dead had come in the time of the battle with the spirit phone. However, let's lean back toward the subject matter at hand, Edison and Tesla.
Fun fact, in the late 1800s, Henry Ford was an employee at Edison's company working as a chief engineer. In his spare time, Ford was working independently on a design for an invention that would eventually change the world. I know it kind of goes without saying, but obviously, it was an automobile. What? So they're at a company party one day when Ford managed to take the opportunity to approach Edison, and he gives him a rundown on this amazing concept that he's working on. According to Annetta Black's Atlas Obscura article, Edison was surprisingly very supportive towards Ford in regard to this invention, stating, "Young man, that's the thing. You have it. Your car is self-contained and carries its own power plant." Now, knowing that Edison had a reputation for adopting the ideas of others, adapting and improving them, and claiming them as his own.
What?
I'm honestly a little surprised that he didn't take the idea and run with it, so to speak. Or drive.
Well, that's probably a harder one to steal. Like, the manufacturer of an automobile would be.
It was the concept. It was nothing more than the idea in his head at the time.
Oh.
And he was an employee of Edison, which means he could have said, I own your ideas as well, because I pay you to have them.
So one could surmise that.
One could surmise. He very well could have done exactly that, because, well, he's freaking Thomas Edison. However, the two masters of industry became friends, spending a lot of time together in the early 1900s as Ford's business began to take off. Both men had become very successful in their respective businesses, and owning a personal car had become a highly in-demand item among the public. They shared ideas, supported one another, and influenced each other's work. When Edison became ill, the two best friends indulged in fun activities such as wheelchair races and other silly frivolities.
Did we just become best friends?
Edison was quoted saying this of Ford at a celebration event.
As to Henry Ford, words are inadequate to express my feelings. I can only say in the fullest meaning of the term, he is my friend.
So when Edison is on his deathbed, the rumor is that Ford asked for one last keepsake by which he might remember his friend. Ford asked for a very interesting keepsake, a request that some might consider to be odd or even extreme. Edison's son, Charles, was asked by Ford to capture his father's dying breath in a test tube. Edison had been in a coma from which he woke, and with that last breath, he spoke the words, "It's very beautiful over there. I don't know where there is, but I know it's somewhere, and I hope it's beautiful."
I don't know about you, but I think that's kind of amazing.
It is kind of amazing.
I do, however, find it interesting that he bonded so close to Ford in their friendship when, in fact, Edison was rumored to be quite cold and neglectful, especially towards his family. He was not known for being a caring or compassionate employer. In fact, he was called a tyrant and had been described as ruthless. So, that's kind of an interesting thought.
We kind of touched on it earlier with the whole Ford story, and you may have gotten that impression when listening to a lot of the saga between he and Tesla. It's widely rumored that Edison was one to often take the ideas of others and make them his own, patenting them, making the profit. For example, Edison gets credit for the fluoroscope, which made the first X-rays possible. However, German scientist Wilhelm Röntgen was the actual inventor of a device to see the bones of a human and actually took an X-ray of his wife's hand several years prior to Edison. Edward Leon Scott de Martinville created his phonautograph more than 15 years before Edison's 1877 phonograph. One of the worst of these scenarios is that of Louis de Prince, a French inventor who created working motion pictures before Edison. The story goes that in 1890 he was on his way to patent his invention in England with a plan to then sail to America to exhibit and patent it. Le Prince got on a train on September 13th that year, never to be seen again. Well, even his luggage was gone. His family moved forward in their effort to patent his work. However, coincidentally, in 1892, 2 years after testifying in a lawsuit against Thomas Edison, Le Prince's son was killed and the murderer was never apprehended. After that, he brought a pirated version of the film, A Trip to the Moon, to America and showed it all over the country. When the filmmaker invested a significant amount of money on a trip to America to show the film, he found that most people had already seen it, and not long after, he went bankrupt.
Does this make Edison any less of a brilliant man? Perhaps not, but ruthless he may have been. So, is it possible that Edison may have been an underhanded contributor to the failure of many of Tesla's projects as well? Having worked with him, he was well aware of his genius, which made him a dangerous competitor. With his plans to create a system of powering the world, for free, there were a lot of men, Edison among them, who stood to lose a lot of money. Mo money, mo problem. Edison was also a player in the committee that assigned patents, which may have been an influence in the decision between Tesla and Marconi, which ended up being a critical blow for Nikola Tesla. That is, of course, all speculation, and not just on our part, but for many. I suppose that it can be said that indeed this is a nice guys finish last tale.
Nikola Tesla died in New York City at the age of 86 years old on January 7, 1943. His cause of death was a coronary thrombosis.
Murder.
I'm not sure how you murder someone with a blood believe.
You know.
That's what happens. There are
ways.
His legacy, however, lives on, and he is regarded as a legend of our time.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes this week's episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast.
Yes, it does.
If you haven't already, make sure you find us on your favorite podcast app. Subscribe, rate, and review. Let your friends know about your favorite show. That's us.
Right, we're your favorite show.
You might not know it yet, but it's true.
Yep.
We're your favorite.
You like us the best.
When you're finished with that, Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and now TikTok.
We got the TikTok. And on TikTok right now, we've just really uploaded clips of our audio, but I have plans
Big plans.
to make some videos.
Fun plans.
I am really addicted to TikTok.
In the name of science.
Social experiments.
Run. We just announced the winners of our last contest on Facebook a couple of days ago, so congratulations to those winners, and make sure you be on the lookout for our next contest, as we're going to keep giving stuff away.
We love giving stuff away.
While you're on Facebook, make sure you check out the page for APN, Attitude Podcast Network, as well as Prescribed Films Podcast Network. There's a lot of great podcasts out there, and these are a few of our recommendations. Don't forget to call our number and leave us a voicemail. The number is 641-812-2635. Don't worry about actually having to talk to us. If you call, it's strictly a message system. If that's not your thing, you can always send us an email to bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com to leave comments, suggestions, complaints, or compliments. We do love compliments. All jokes aside, we really do care about your opinions, and if there's something you'd like to hear about or something you think we could do better, let us know. As always, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us, and we hope you stick with us for new and exciting things coming in the future. In the name of science!